Hey, Dawg Nation, I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. You have no idea how grateful I am that you allow us to talk to you and be a part of your life and experience all the things that kind of go on in life. And obviously, we're in the midst of a tough time here around Dawg Nation with the news that you're well aware of by now of the tragic passing of a couple of members of the Georgia football program. We talked obviously a lot about that yesterday. We're going to keep talking a lot about that for a long time in the future, honoring Devin and Chandler, sharing our feelings of concern and love for those who are part of this Georgia football program. We're going to give those coaches and players some space to kind of work through this the best that they know how to, and we're going to do, I guess, the best that we can to stay connected with each other during what is undoubtedly a very challenging time. So today we're going to have something that feels a little bit more like a regular show. Jake Fromm is going to be on. I'm really excited about having him. Connor Riley is going to be on. I'm really excited about having him. There's a lot of news out there over the course of the last 24 hours about guys coming into the program, a couple of big 2025 commits, some players at least considering exiting the program. We'll talk about some transfer news on the show today. There's a couple of rumors out there. We'll talk about those and try to see how substantial they might be. And we're just going to let kind of people figure this out and kind of go at their own pace on all of this, of how much regular football you're sort of ready to digest again. So I appreciate you being here. There was a very nice gesture last night that obviously got a lot of attention. We'll finish today's show by taking a closer look at all of that. When it's all said and done, as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down, we'll read a few more comments today than maybe we did yesterday, and we'll just try to make sense of all the terrible sadness that we're forced to endure here at this moment. So I'm grateful to be with you all, and we're going to move on here and talk a little bit of football and just sort of see how it goes. But thanks for being here. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. It's presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
As you all are very well aware, we are in a very unusual time for us here at Dawg Nation because of the sadness we've endured based on the news that came out on Saturday night. And as we talked about a lot on yesterday's show, it is not easy to know how to respond to all of this, and certainly kind of coming up with the words that convey all of the appropriate feelings. That's just not an easy thing to do whatsoever. And when it comes to grief and things like that, people kind of move at their own pace on these kinds of things. And so when you wake up today and you know you got a show to do, you're left to wonder, well, what do you talk about? And what kind of mood is the audience going to be in on a day like this? And it is not easy to know. And so as I was kind of planning what we're going to do today, I guess the conclusion that I drew was, okay, we're just going to kind of talk about the news and, some of the fun stuff that we like to do. Maybe we're not quite ready to do all of that yet, and I don't know when we will be. And some of the, other things, hey, maybe we'll kind of sort of slowly work our way back towards that at some point in time, the same way that all of you have when it comes to, specific situations in your own life. But for the people who are ready to hear about some football, let's give it to them, and let's just let people choose for themselves what they're ready for. And if you're not quite ready for this, I totally get all of that, and I completely understand where that might be coming from. But we're just going to let people kind of decide for themselves and move at their own pace in terms of how much of the regular content of this show that they are ready to digest again. So, as I said before, there was a lot that came out yesterday, and we're just going to kind of walk through some of that right now. I'm going to give you a few thoughts on it, and we'll just sort of talk some football. And maybe some of this will be kind of the thing that gives you a little bit of comfort because maybe distraction from some of the other things that are going on, or however this lands with you. We're just going to try to provide some of what we have typically done in the past, and this and every other day, we're just really, really grateful to have you as a part of the show that we do here today. Obviously, Georgia got two very big commitments yesterday from the class of 2025. I want to roll through both these guys here for a moment. Then I'm going to give you a brief thought on them here. Let me show you Justice Terry. And there was a tweet. Jeff shared this in the story that he wrote at DawgNation.com to give you an idea of how big and sort of rocked up Terry already is. This is a fantastic defensive lineman. He's drawn comparisons to Trayvon Walker. This is a guy who already, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, is the number 35 player nationally for the class of 2025. He's the number 6 overall player in the state of Georgia and the number 4 defensive lineman. So it's easy to understand coming out of Manchester, Georgia, you know why he's getting those Trayvon Walker comparisons. And that wasn't all for Georgia yesterday. Also, Micah DuBose, a terrific offensive lineman out of Mobile, Alabama, who also brings some big size to the table. I think we have a little bit of a photo here of Micah to show a nice DawgNation edit. He's already 6'5", 315 pounds out of Mobile. Another one of these guys that's very highly rated. This is a top 50 player nationally for the class of 2025. These are the kinds of recruits that you celebrate. And in particular, I guess what comes to mind for me about both these guys is there was something that Kirby Smart said many, many years ago. And this is one of those things that, like, I try to collect a lot of audio and things like that, but over the course of time, you just sort of lose some of it. I'm never quite sure where it goes, but there was some audio I used to have of Kirby, and I've lost it. And I've even tried to go back and find it. It was from his very first year at Georgia in 2016. And it's just sort of hard to find because, back then the video stuff wasn't quite as built out for anybody as it is now. And so some of this stuff is just not quite as well archived from way back then as the current era in which we live in. But on, I think it was signing day in 2016, Kirby Smart talked about the way in which you win with big guys, offensive and defensive linemen, your line of scrimmage type guys. He talked about the fact that these are always long-range recruitments because there are just fewer of them. I wish I had this audio to play for you. It was so good. And I remember thinking, gosh, this is a really thoughtful thing for a first-year coach to be saying at the time. And obviously, Kirby Smart has sort of lived this philosophy the rest of the time that he's been at Georgia. But he talked about how just these line of scrimmage recruits, these big guys, they're just long-range recruitments. You have to have relationships with them that last over the course of years if you want to win with them. And I don't think that those words are proven any better than what you see going on right now. This is not the current recruiting cycle. We're still technically sort of in the final days of the 2023 cycle. The 2024 guys are about to have kind of next man up status, and this is the following cycle after that. It's 2025. But if you want to win with guys like this is the time that you do it. You've got to have a relationship built over the course of years, and you better have been on them first. You better have been, getting deep and connected with them at a time in which some other programs are maybe panicking, trying to grab whoever they can in the transfer portal to kind of meet their immediate need. If you're a team like Georgia, you're not quite so worried about what's urgent. You're worried more about what's important, which means looking to the future and say, who are the best offensive and defensive linemen 2 cycles from now? And let's make sure that we are in the best possible relationship with all of them. In the case of Terry and DuBose here, you see the proof of that. And I think it also kind of demonstrates why it is that Georgia is such a successful program and the feeling that Georgia fans should never take for granted about your team when you go into a really big game. Like the TCU game is a perfect example of this, where the opponent seems to always have some sort of game plan that kind of sounds a little bit like this. Well, Georgia's got the clear advantage on the offensive and defensive line, but we're going to have to do this, and this as a way of trying to mitigate against that. Like certainly TCU is an example of that. We can't really match what Georgia does on the offensive line. We can't really match what Georgia does on the defensive line. So therefore, we better make sure we do this, that, and the third as a way of negating that. And you don't have to be a football expert. You don't have to be a former coach to understand that if that's the origin of your game plan, then you're off to a really, really bad start when it comes to actually beating Georgia. If you're waving the white flag on both lines of scrimmage before the game even begins, then your chances of pulling that upset have just been greatly diminished. And listen, great programs make sure their strengths stay strong. And Georgia has had, obviously, great strength on the offensive and defensive line to the tune of 2 consecutive national championships. There's a reason why Georgia will also be ranked preseason number 1 here to begin 2023 eventually there as well. It's the ability to kind of maintain that for the offensive line. And in the midst of everything that's going on for Georgia right now, pay close attention to the fact that Georgia is already building ahead to make sure they're doing this in the future too. That oftentimes those kind of recruits from a cycle beyond where we currently are, in this case, kind of almost 2 cycles beyond where we currently are, doesn't always get a lot of notice. It doesn't always get a lot of attention. But what you saw on display yesterday, if you were, even paying attention to it, is one of those things that sort of makes Georgia, Georgia. Now, to switch gears completely now and talk about something totally different, there was a rumor that was out there that I have to admit I find to be kind of interesting, and a lot of Georgia fans would also probably say, well, this doesn't really feel like great news, and I understand where you're coming from on that. Jeremy Fowler is a good reporter for ESPN, and obviously we've kind of finished what we sort of feel like is the coaching carousel for college sports, but obviously the NFL, because the season starts a week later, the season's longer, the playoffs are just now beginning, we're sort of only just now kind of getting into the NFL coaching carousel, and that's going to be spinning pretty wildly here for the next few weeks. And Jeremy Fowler from ESPN put this out yesterday that one college coach I'm hearing that has garnered NFL offensive coordinator interest from teams this cycle is Georgia offensive coordinator Todd Monken. Fowler writes on Twitter, he's had a successful run with the national champion Bulldogs. And is also the former offensive coordinator of the Bucks and Browns. Many of you, of course, know he was play caller in Tampa Bay. He was not the play caller there in Cleveland, but he does have, obviously, the NFL experience, as Jeremy kind of points out. Now, I will tell you the thought that I had about Monken on Monday night. And I don't know if y'all kind of feel, this past Monday night, back when we were in Los Angeles, I don't know if y'all kind of feel this same way, but I have sort of felt this over the course of the last couple of years, that for whatever reason, and I talked to Todd Monken myself about this at the media day for the national championship, for whatever reason, like Todd Monken has had this unbelievable level of success at Georgia. There's no doubt that he's completely transformed the offense. You look at the overall numbers in 2019, both stylistically and statistically, what happened for Georgia in 2020 and then 2021, and obviously then in 2022. It's just dramatic improvement seemingly year over year over year. And there's no doubt that Todd Monken has been the architect of all of that. There's no doubt that Todd Monken has, I think, been the instrument by which all that's been able to happen. But are you like me and feeling like that even though that's kind of true, that even though Monken has had all that great success, I actually don't really feel like Todd has gotten all that famous for what he's done at Georgia. And that's a weird thing to say because this past year, Monken, I believe, according to the USA Today database, was the highest paid assistant coach in college football. And yet, all that said, I still don't think Monken was getting the kind of chatter that some other offensive coordinators were getting. And listen, if that is true, and maybe you might say it's not, but if you just were to stipulate for a moment that it is true, there may be lots of reasons why. I mean, Georgia is still a program that has such a cult of personality and such a dynamic force as its head coach, Kirby Smart. Maybe that sucks some of the life, out of the attention that other assistant coaches might get. There is still this perception that Georgia is a defensive-led program, and as good as the defense is, the offense obviously kind of kept pace very, very well. But perception sometimes rules the day, and maybe as good as Monken's been, the perception's just not quite what it should be. I would also say that Monken's one of those guys that I'm not quite so sure he seeks out the spotlight maybe as much as some do. There are a lot of offensive coordinators that like being on the sideline, for instance. I've always kind of joked they like to be seen cooking. Lane Kiffin, as an offensive coordinator, was in Alabama. He liked to kind of put his hands up in the air when Alabama had a big play. He wanted everybody to know who it was that called that play. Monken, for the most part, is content to be in the coach's booth. That's a place you get less attention. You get shown on TV some, but it's still not quite the same hero shot that you have on the sideline, fist in the air when the big play gets called. But whatever the reason is, if it is indeed true, it sort of seems like that Todd Monken has not quite gotten enough attention that he deserved for the successful turnaround that he has been the architect of here when it comes to Georgia offense. And I have to admit, while that maybe is not great for Todd, obviously you want guys who are doing a great job to get the pats on the back they deserve. For those of us who are Georgia fans, maybe that has kind of been a little bit of a good thing because maybe you had less reason to worry that Monken might leave because Monken just wasn't quite getting the attention that maybe he deserved. Well, then lo and behold, during a national championship game, he scored 65 points. And I was thinking during the game this past Monday, well, if it was true that Monken wasn't getting enough attention before, to have this kind of offensive explosion on the very biggest stage the sport can provide, my guess is Todd Monken's going to get a lot more attention. And I don't know if this is a coincidence or not, but sure enough, just a few days later, now you got Jeremy Fowler saying Todd Monken's getting all this attention from NFL teams, and I would say that the national championship game is probably the number one reason why on that. So Does Monken want to go back to the NFL? I don't know. I would say these are the kinds of jobs. Listen, I may be wrong about this, but the perception I have is that being a play caller in the NFL might be more interesting to him to being the kind of head coach in a college place where he has to sort of be the face of the program and kind of always be sort of smiling and happy and sort of play the role of the politician and do all the recruiting stuff and things like that. To just go to the NFL if he wanted to and just call those plays and do all that with grown men, he might like that better than being a head coach somewhere else. So it's certainly not my, place to say whether Monken would leave for the NFL or not, but I've always kind of had the perception that maybe being a play caller in the NFL might be more interesting to him than being a head coach at somewhere in college like the Purdue job that he was rumored to be in the mix for. Being play caller for so-and-so NFL team or being head coach at Purdue, just given what we think we know about Todd Monken's personality, I would think being an offensive coordinator calling the plays for an NFL team might be more interesting to him than that. Now, is it more interesting than what he could have at Georgia? That's what we don't know, obviously. We may have to find out here over the course of the next couple of weeks. Monken's clearly the kind of guy that you would want to keep because of how successful that he has been. Now, Georgia's also got a lot of really smart guys that have been a part of the staff. Buster Faulkner, who just left, Mike Bobo, of course, and on you could go. And at different times, it seems like different people have had an influence on the Georgia offense, but I'm not going to sugarcoat how important Todd Monken has been. Georgia fans have grown to love him. They've grown to celebrate him, and I think with good reason. So this is one of those rumors that we'll watch and see if this ever really truly gains legs. Sometimes this stuff on social media ends up just not really being much of a thing, and maybe the thing with Monken ends up being the same way. But based on the success that he's had at Georgia, I think he deserves to get some attention. Based on the success that he's had at Georgia, I think that Monken deserves to get some job offers. It seems like he's been happy at Georgia in the past. I certainly hope that remains true because this is one of those guys that Dog fans would obviously love to be able to keep. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We're happy to have you with us. Of course, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're back on the radio again today on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. We were preempted yesterday because of the holiday. I'm glad to be back there again. And, of course, as a podcast, Apple, Spotify, everything else in between, we try to make the show available, and I'm always very, very thankful for those of you that allow us to talk about Georgia football with you. It is a privilege that I take very, very seriously. Hopefully I don't take myself too seriously, but the job that we do around here, I do take it seriously because it's just one of those things that's just an awesome privilege to be able to speak to you. So thank you very much on that. And I'm grateful for sponsors that allow us to do this too. Our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. I love Jay and the team over there. I know how happy they were when Georgia won the national championship. I know how deeply connected they feel to this Georgia program. They're proud partners of UGA. They support the Dogs, and we love them, and I'm thankful for them. And I don't mind telling you at all that if you're dealing with a challenging situation like water where it's not supposed to be, cracks in your walls, those kind of foundation waterproofing issues, you've heard me say this before, Engineered Solutions of Georgia is a name you ought to know. They've got a full team of engineers on staff. There's no one in our market that can provide that level of resource to solve your problem if you're dealing with those foundation, those waterproofing issues. They're longtime friends of ours at DawgNation, and it is truly, truly a great feeling to know we've got partners who've been with us every step of the way for such a long time. Our friends at ESOG are that. So please give them a call, 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now for your foundation, your waterproofing issues. We're very, very thankful to have Engineered Solutions of Georgia as part of this show here today. All right, we're going to get Jake Fromm coming up later on. I'm very happy to have Jake back on the show today. We'll look forward to talking to Jake here coming up in just a moment. We'll hear from Connor Riley here coming up in a couple of moments there as well. We'll try to balance the sadness of what we're feeling with the curiosity about kind of what's next for this Georgia football program in terms of the stuff that we knew we'd be talking about, like, guys potentially moving on in the NFL draft or maybe choosing to stay or some of the other stuff that's out there. We'll try to see if we can strike the right balance and all that moving forward. There's also a couple of other stories kind of outside the boundaries of Georgia that I want to touch on before we're done here today too. Interesting for different reasons, so we'll kind of get to all that as our show goes on. Prior to that, though, let me go around the Dawghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at Georgia's own credit union. in addition to Georgia adding a couple of recruits yesterday for the class of 2025 and trying to follow some of the decisions that might come down in terms of the NFL draft, there was also a handful of transfer portal stories yesterday that I want to make you aware of. I guess to begin with, Brett Seither, a Georgia tight end, announced that he was transferring and then pretty quickly announced that he would be going to Georgia Tech. MJ Sherman, the outside linebacker, is transferring. He's on his way to Nebraska. And then we also found out yesterday that Dominic Blaylock is entering the transfer portal. We don't yet know where Blaylock is going to go, and I guess the option exists that he might even return eventually. But for now, Blaylock going into the transfer portal, and maybe he'll end up following Sherman and Seither and kind of finding a new home. There's no doubt that Dominic's a very talented player. If he does want to play somewhere else, my guess is he'll have plenty of opportunities to do that. And look, I think in recent times we've had to make peace with a lot of new stuff in college athletics, NIL, in some cases transfer portal, and there are certain aspects of like the college football world that are a little bit more difficult to make peace with. But in this particular case, these are the kinds of transfers that I just simply can't be mad at. I mean, I'd love to have Sherman and Blaylock and Seither. I'd love to have everybody currently on this Georgia team stay with this Georgia team. There's a certain attachment you feel to players that have been a part of your program. But at the same time, you understand that if you're a college athlete, you only get a small window to participate in and live out your college life. And obviously you want to take maximum opportunity to take full advantage of that, which means that if you're not playing as much as you want to, you want to go somewhere where you can. And so you saw the way in which Nebraska fans celebrated getting Sherman yesterday. You see the way in which Tech fans, I'm sure, are going to celebrate getting Brett Seither. If someone gets Dominic Blaylock, they're going to be celebrating big with him. And the same thing for some other Georgia guys that have recently gone to the transfer portal there as well, like Ryland Goulding and others. You obviously see that these are going to be a very attractive prospects to other programs that might get them. And ultimately, I just can't be mad at that. I really can't. That if opportunity for playing time exists in greater measure somewhere else, then of course you'd want to go there, and of course you'd want to do that. So I wish them well as they do. And I'll tell you the words that really kind of ring in my head around all of this, and eventually we'll get back to sort of playing audio and things like that again. But the words that kind of ring in my head, what Kirby said on that Tuesday after the national championship last week in Los Angeles, was kind of the final press conference before everybody went back home and went their separate ways. And he talked about transfer stuff, and he talked about how the fact that it made him want to cry that players who knew they would be transferring chose to keep that quiet, chose not to allow that to become a distraction, chose to stay committed to a team that they knew they wouldn't be playing on in the future. And part of the reason why they're transferring in the first place is because they maybe weren't playing as much as they would have liked to on the team they were on, and yet they still were willing to commit to a cause larger than themselves and allow Georgia and really contribute to Georgia winning another national championship. I think Smart's words on that ought to carry a lot of weight with us, that a lot of these guys, Blaylock or Seither or Sherman or whoever else, they were a contribution to Georgia no matter how much they played because of the fact that they didn't allow themselves to become a distraction. And they were willing to contribute, and they were willing to be a part of this team, the connection that Kirby Smart talks about. These guys were willing to stay connected even though they knew eventually their path might take them somewhere else. So that matters to me, and I wish these guys well. I think a lot of us have had the experience of seeing some transfer players move on. We end up cheering for them, at least to a degree, with their new team, and I think for a lot of these guys, we'll do some version of that there as well, depending on where maybe they land. So we'll make that around the Dawghouse for you here right now. It's obviously presented by Georgia's own credit union, and, listen, a lot of you kind of came back from Los Angeles. You obviously have, a lot of travel, a lot of things like that going on. New Year, you have big plans. I know my family, we're looking forward to a vacation here coming up very soon. Well, listen, for the things that you're doing, trust me when I tell you that those purchases, those things that you're already doing can be made more enjoyable when you use one of those Visa, Signature, and Platinum cards from our friends at Georgia's own credit union, because what they want to provide for you is really a great incentive for using their product. I'm talking about Flex Rewards, but can be used for gift cards, your cash back, travel, merchandise, so much more. Just as thank you to you for being a loyal customer to them. You can also get up to $150 when you open a new Platinum or Signature card, and there are some restrictions, so check out georgiasown.org for more details on that. That's georgiasown.org for more details on that. The word Georgia spelled out, georgiasown.org for a lot more. All right, so before we're done, there was a very touching tribute last night during the NFL playoff game by a former Dog to Devin and Chandler. We're gonna talk about that a little bit. Jake Fromm is going to join us today. I'm very thankful to have Jake on the show. But for everything else, obviously the very sad circumstances that we're trying to make sense of, and maybe some of the other stuff going on around UGA right now, let's also bring on our friend Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
I'm glad to have Connor Riley on the show today. Connor and I haven't really had a chance to talk in person since all of this has gone down. Connor, you're younger than me, and you're a lot closer to the age of the UGA football family that's kind of going through all of this right now. I don't know if you knew Chandler personally. I don't know how well you knew Devin, but I am curious of your thoughts here in the midst of trying to get back and cover this football team, and I guess try to provide people a little bit of entertainment. We're obviously still dealing with our feelings about what happened late Saturday night. So I guess just let me give you the floor to say whatever you want to about what has happened here at the University of Georgia.
Yeah, it's an impossible tragedy to sort of try and wrap your mind around. Devin Willock was 20 years old. Chandler Declares was 24. My sister is 24 years old. She's currently getting her master's degree at the University of Georgia, so obviously this hits close to home. And, I'm thinking about both of them. I mean, Devin, I can't claim to know him well, but I know his story well. And this was a kid who, as Rusty pointed out, took a Greyhound bus to come and work out at Georgia. And when he ultimately signs, and he comes up signing with Georgia after Josh Braun bails on the class, and Georgia brings him in, and he had a broken leg his senior year of high school, and weight was going to be an issue with him. It was something that he was going to have to battle, and we got a chance to talk to him, I'm pretty sure, back in the spring. And BA, you and I have both fluctuated with our weights, and we know how much of a battle that can be. And this was a kid who had just completely transformed his body into being, I think, one of the more athletic offensive linemen on this team, going from 370 pounds to a rocked-out 320. The mental fortitude it takes to go through that is just incredible. And this is a guy who, started multiple games for Georgia this past season. It was a contributor on our national title team, and, was a guy who was going to play a big role for this team next season. And, his life is over, and it's just so incredibly crushing. And then with Chandler, I'm not a very outgoing person. When people that know the Dogs and know me through DawgNation come up and see me and talk to me, know that I am just trying my hardest to put a smile on and just try and seem like a personal person. She did that all the time, and it takes a special kind of person to do the job that she was doing. And it's said so often, but this world's a little less bright with Chandler and Devin not being in it. And you look at every picture of both of them, and they just have these massive smiles. Every time you saw Devin, he always had this big smile on his face. He was so happy to be here. He was so happy to be a Georgia Bulldog. And I know Chandler felt the same way too. And it's just hard. I think back to something, because I've dealt with grief in my own life. When you experience loss on the level that this campus is now dealing with, people that know the teammates of Devin and Chandler that know them so well, there's the person you were before, and there's the person you are after, but you're never the same.
Yeah.
And all you can do is just put one foot in front of the next, because you're present and you're here, and that's all you really can do. And so this community, this team, the people that know them, it's a very trying time, and all that we can offer them is, just the ability to put one foot in front of the next and try and keep going when it is just so incredibly hard to do so.
I think one of the things that I find most interesting about Chandler and Devin is the way in which at a very young age, both of them obviously very young, they seem to be very clear about what they wanted out of life. Starting with Devin here, in Jeff's story, the fact that he sought out a spot on Paramus Catholic's roster. That's a power program in the Northeast, and he clearly wanted to be a part of that team. And then, as you said, taking the Greyhound bus to come down here to Georgia, clearly thought that Georgia was the right place for him to be. The level of clarity that he had, even as a high schooler, about what he wanted his life to look like, I don't think I had that. And for someone like Chandler, I mean, I'm sure she must have had thoughts all the time about, do I want to work this hard? When she probably saw her friends doing things that maybe she wasn't getting to do because she was preparing for junior day or preparing for whoever was going to be on campus. And that's a lot of work, and a lot of that's thankless. I mean, you get a little bit of fame on social media for it, but there's a lot of that kind of work that just doesn't get noticed, and no one realizes the way in which you're kind of putting the grind in. And yet she seemed very clear about, this is what I, want to do. And I find that to be, I guess, incredibly inspiring on one hand, but on the other hand, it makes it so much more sad to know that these were young people that seem to have a very sharp level of focus about what they wanted their lives to look like, and all the more reason why this is just such a tragic story.
Yeah, they were doing what they loved, and you've heard in talking to people around the program, they've told us time and time again, look, Georgia's not for everyone, and this is a hard program to make it at, and both of these people had made it here, and were contributing members to back-to-back national championship teams, and it's not, this isn't something, being a football player or working on that recruiting staff, that's not something that you can't have your entire heart invested in, and they did that, and they did it every single day, and it just sort of speaks to the level of commitment that they had, the drive that they had, the types of people that they were, to where, they could have elected to go do something else. They're certainly talented and capable enough to do so, but it meant a lot to both of them in the reporting that we've seen on both Devin and Chandler and who they were as people. It meant something to them to do it at the University of Georgia, and that's what makes the loss of them so much harder, with that they wanted to be here. And in the hours after, a rare celebratory moment where, this Georgia program, yes, they were, enjoying Saturday and all that they had accomplished. But, Devin and Chandler also knew, hey, like, the work's going to continue, and it's not that far away from doing so. And they enjoyed that aspect of it as well. And so, for them to be gone, it is, there's just no words that we can really put out there and speak into. But we can try and help. I know from my standpoint, you mentioned, we provide entertainment. And, I'll write the news when it comes in, and try and provide some thoughts about what comes next for Georgia. But it's just so impossible to think about anything else other than really Devin and Chandler, and obviously Tori and Warren, how they are doing, and their mental mindset right now, and how they deal with what comes next.
With that in mind, it's awkward to transition to anything else, but there is some confusion out there, Connor, and I'm hoping that you might be able to kind of help us maybe understand this a little bit more to the extent that it can be understood. I think a lot of people were expecting to get an announcement yesterday from Cedric Von Prine Granger, Lad McConkey, maybe Xavier Truss, about what their future was going to be at Georgia, and that didn't come. We obviously understand the fact that right now the business of football at Georgia, at least in the immediate aftermath of what happened, clearly they need some space and they need some grace and all of that. But for people who kind of want to understand, okay, what the timeline might be to hear more about what might be next for those guys, is there anything you can tell us about that right now?
Yeah, so the official list of NFL draft early entrants will be sent to the NFL on Friday. And so what players can do and have done in the past is they can enter their name up to Monday and then have the ability through Thursday at midnight to possibly remove their name from the NFL draft entry list. I know there has also been some talk about Georgia players getting an extension given the extenuating circumstances surrounding them. But, obviously, Cedric, Xavier Truss was roommates with Devin Willock. Like, their mind is just so far from what that is. And ultimately, by the end of this week, I do think we'll know where the decision lies. But the NFL has given them some leeway already in terms of, you can enter your name in and you have until Thursday to pull it out. And I expect, at some point later this week, we'll get an official clarification on where those guys are leaning. But, right now, their minds are just, and they have to be, they're just so far from the idea of, okay, I gotta prepare a graphic, thank everyone for my time at UGA, and all that comes with that, or make another graphic of whether or not I'm coming back. Like that just seems so irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. And look, I know I wrote about it this morning, like, and I'll be honest here, some people, they want to know the answers, they want to do that. Like I personally, like, I don't feel comfortable poking around and asking that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And look, with Cedric and Ladd and Xavier and whoever else, when they want to make those announcements, like I'll write after that. But like, to go inquiring around about that, I'd much rather hear how they're doing mentally and how they're trying to overcome this great tragedy than figure out what they're going to be doing or who they're going to be playing for next year.
I talked a little bit about the Todd Monken rumor before you joined us. Do you agree with something that I've said, which is that over the course of the last couple of years, for as successful as Monken has been as the offensive coordinator at Georgia, I don't know that he quite got as much attention for that as maybe his success deserved. For instance, he'll be a Broyles Award finalist, but I never really got the impression he was going to win the award. It always just seemed like somebody else was getting more attention than he was. And then lo and behold, he scored 65 points in a national championship game. And all of a sudden, I think I even may have said this. I said this to somebody on Monday night. Well, I guess now he's about to start getting a little bit more attention. And now we have the Jeremy Fowler rumor out there that he might be on the radar for some NFL teams as a potential offensive coordinator. What do you make of this? First of all, do you agree with my premise that all of a sudden now to have that kind of success on the biggest stage is going to make him more of a target potentially for NFL teams? And I guess, what do you think Monken's response might be to all that?
Yeah, I'm not surprised by it. That's just sort of, you and I, we follow this industry close enough. We know sort of the ebbs and flows that come with it. Given his background in the NFL beforehand, I'm not surprised he gets mentioned there. I will say I'd be pretty surprised if he does end up leaving, just because, the way his contract is written, he has a buyout that would need to be paid if he does leave for the NFL, whereas if he were to leave to be a college head coach, he would not.
Interesting.
And that would sort of lead me to believe that Todd Monken wants to be a college head coach more so than he necessarily does a college offensive or an NFL offensive coordinator. And I'll take this one step further. I think a lot of your success as an NFL offensive coordinator is tied directly to who your quarterback is. You can look at Greg Roman of the Baltimore Ravens right now. When he has Lamar Jackson, things are going great. When he doesn't have Lamar Jackson, things aren't going all that well for him. And so I think a lot of that is tied to the situation of who you have as a quarterback, whereas at the collegiate level, especially when you're at a place like Georgia and you have such an overwhelming talent advantage. I mean, look, Stetson Bennett's an incredible quarterback. There's no denying that there. But, with the benefits that Georgia has and the talent and the inequality that exists in the college game, you're not as dependent on a star quarterback and having great quarterback play each and every week that you are at the NFL level. And I think that can be appealing to Todd Monken, given, you look where he's worked in the past in the NFL. The quarterback's been Ryan Fitzpatrick, Baker Mayfield, and it's rare to get a shot at a guy like a Patrick Mahomes, like a Josh Allen. And so I do think that the college game and the college atmosphere, I think that suits Monken right now. I think he prefers the college game. I think he loves the freedom and the responsibility that he has at the University of Georgia. And so I understand why NFL teams would go after him. But I just, with the way things have gone for Monken, I would be pretty surprised at this point if he does, in fact, end up leaving Georgia at this point in the offseason. And the way things have gone for him at Georgia to go be an NFL offensive coordinator.
So I think we're on the same page on that. I certainly get the impression that Monken's very happy here, and he's obviously very well paid here. Something else that you said, and you may very well be right, I guess I'm a little bit surprised because it seems like my instinct on this is a little bit different, that Monken's this sort of no-nonsense guy, and, I mean, interviewing him the national championship, he just sort of tells it like it is. He doesn't hold back in the way that some college coaches can sometimes be a little bit more political with their answers. I guess I always sort of assume that kind of personality, you might call it gruff, I don't know what the right adjective necessarily to describe it is, that it might just sort of fit in with sort of the grown man culture of the NFL as opposed to having to be the kind of happy face of a college program. That I think I agree with you that I don't have any indication that Monken's going to leave Georgia, but I guess I always assume that an NFL offensive coordinator, being the guy that actually got to call the play, something that he did in Tampa, would be more appealing to him than being a head coach in college, where you have to do kind of more of the stuff that a I'm not quite so sure that Todd Monken necessarily loves doing. Would you mind expanding on your thought on that just a little bit more?
Yeah, I think his personality, and when we've seen him in interviews, it just runs so stark to what Kirby Smart has done and been about. Like, I understand where you're coming from in that, but there's, and look, I think you can go back and look at the way things went down with him in Cleveland his last year as an offensive coordinator there. There's a certain level of politicking in the NFL that you don't have to deal with in college, I think, especially in his role as an offensive coordinator at Georgia. And, maybe when he becomes a head coach, when that day comes, there's some handshaking he'll have to do, but there's not the same level of appeasement that you have to go through of, validating your NFL quarterback, trying to set him up for success. The microscope at the NFL level is so much bigger than it is at the college level. And so I think because of that, Todd Monken, while yes, he is a stark personality contrast when he gets in front of the media with Kirby Smart, I do think that behind closed doors, I think Kirby and Todd are probably a little bit more similar than maybe perhaps we give them credit for. And I think that because of that, I do think that Todd, sees a path forward where things keep going well for him at Georgia. I do think that team is going to realize, hey, like, this guy's just too good to let, be out there. And look, we've seen coaches later in their coaching stages have success at a big level. Willie Fritz at Tulane comes to mind. Obviously Paul Johnson ran a triple option, but Paul Johnson had a lot of success at Georgia Tech there. And so I do think that in the college game, Matt Brown is still having some level of success at North Carolina. You have seen these coaches who are a little bit older and maybe get started a little bit later in their coaching lives have more success. Whereas you look at the NFL, a lot of these guys that are getting hired now are just younger and younger. Kevin O'Connell, the Minnesota Vikings, Cliff Kingsbury years ago for the Arizona Cardinals. Those guys, Sean McVay, those guys are of a younger cut than Todd Monken is. And where I think at the college level, they're maybe a little bit more willing to hire someone of Monken's age. Granted, he's only 56. He's not a dinosaur.
Right.
I think at the NFL level, you see a push to hire younger minds, so to speak.
Well, Connor, it's always good to talk football with you. I appreciate you doing that with us here today. We will look forward to continue reading what you write at DawgNation.com, and obviously enjoy the idea of getting together under happier circumstances here very soon.
Yep. I talked to your people. Tell them you love them. Hug somebody today, and thanks for having me on, BN.
No doubt, Connor. Thanks so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I think what Connor says there is really true at the end, that when you come down to it, like, that's just, every opportunity to just grab somebody and bring them close to you, whether it be your wife, your kids, your friends, just, we should never need an excuse to want to draw closer to the people in our lives. And, this is obviously the portion of the show which will transition, talk a little bit about Royal Caribbean. And I know that may seem like a little bit of a weird thing to talk about a day like this, but I'm telling you right now, what it's kind of gone on with our family the last couple of days is we have a vacation coming up in February. And I tell you, like, the happiest stuff for me, I mean, honestly, even as happy as being on the cruise itself is that chance to kind of, we'll watch like the YouTube videos and the things like that. We'll get excited about it. And I just love seeing the excitement in my kids. And I love sharing this with them. And I don't want to miss that life. I really don't. I want to make sure I'm present for all of that. So, it sounds corny because they're sponsored, but I'm grateful for Royal Caribbean because they're giving me this level of happiness right now that I'm able to share with my kids. And ultimately, that's the stuff that really matters in life. So, one of these days we'll get back to feeling really, really good about the Dog Nation cruise, and I promise we're going to have so much fun on that. It seems weird to kind of brag on that too much right now, so let me kind of do what needs to be done. RoyalDogs.com, that's the website, RoyalDogs.com. Jessica Slater is a great travel agent. You can call her 770-718-9147, 770-718-9147. But I don't mind telling you, I'm thankful, for Jessica. I'm thankful for Royal Caribbean because we got this cruise planned for my family, the one we're about to take. That has brought us a lot of happiness. It really has. And stuff like that matters in life. And so I'm excited about being able to do that. I love our great partners. Royal Caribbean's a great one. Royal Caribbean's kind of introduced Jessica to us, and she's become a good friend of ours too. So I'm thankful for having people like that in our lives, and I'm happy to tell their stories, even on days when obviously maybe it doesn't feel quite so easy to want to try to have fun. So Thankful for them and thankful for all of you there as well. Let me cruise around the SEC now, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And I'll talk a little bit about C.J. Stroud. This is not an SEC story, but it is interesting to SEC fans. There had been some chatter yesterday, or I guess the last couple of days, that Stroud might stay at Ohio State, and ultimately made the decision that I'm sure he was likely maybe always going to make, which is going to the NFL. But there had certainly been plenty of rumor and innuendo that he might stay at Ohio State. And the thought here was, well, maybe here's this big-time quarterback, and some sort of NIL deal can pay him enough money that he can stay in college, become a very rich man there, and then go on and get that money later on from the NFL. And ultimately that didn't happen. And some people sort of spin this, well, I guess it just goes to show you that the rumors of Ohio State not being as built out from an NIL standpoint, maybe they're really true. Maybe that's kind of indeed the case here. And I think my overall take on this is probably just a little bit different than that, in that, I mean, ultimately, no college team is ever going to be able to pay NIL money the way that an NFL team can pay salary money. It's just never going to be the same thing. And I think it's important to understand the reason why that is. When an NFL billionaire gives a bunch of money to a player, millions and millions of dollars, that NFL billionaire owner gets back, theoretically, a return on investment for the money that he invests. This is part of his payroll. And by paying these players, they go out, they succeed, the franchise gets more attention. The franchise then grows in value because of the players that he's paying. Whereas in college football, that's not the way it works. For instance, if I'm like billionaire Georgia booster and I offer this big, NIL deal to so-and-so player, I really don't get any return on investment on that. My net worth is diminished by giving that money away. It's not tax deductible. I don't reap financial rewards as a kind of a dividend coming back on that. I'm not an NFL owner from the standpoint that the success that player has generates revenue for me. If I'm a Georgia booster, it may generate happiness for me that the player's playing well, but I don't get my money back. Whereas if you're an NFL team and you have C.J. Stroud as your quarterback, whatever money you give him, theoretically, you ought to give that back the same way that whatever money my employer gives me, they get back from me, hopefully multiples of that, because of the success that I generate as the host of this show. And as an NIL guy, it doesn't necessarily quite work out that way. And when you're left to say, well, why does anybody ever give money to anything? Like in politics, things like that, you say, well, I don't get money back for giving this money, at least you're not supposed to, but maybe I get some sort of power and influence. But for the very best college coaches, you're not going to get that either. In other words, if I were a billionaire and I went to Kirby and said, hey, I'm going to give you $20 million. I want you to go out and get so-and-so player. But once you get him, let me tell you, I want you to use him. Hopefully Kirby Smart, even in the face of that kind of financial windfall, would say, listen, you can give me the NIL money if you want to, but you're not telling me how to use the player. So I don't even get, because that's what good coaches should do in a situation like that. So I don't even get the power and influence that money could potentially buy. And that's going to be one of the challenges going forward with NIL. I believe it's here to stay. I believe it's obviously a very present part of the football conversation, and in some respects it may even be more present than we realize, even on kind of the smaller scale from time to time. But in terms of generating the kind of really big dollars that are either rumored or fantasized about or whatever else, I think the question you have to keep coming back to is, what does the donor get for giving that money? If all it is a reduction of his net worth, then ultimately you're just never going to raise the kind of money that you want to be able to raise. Let me also squeeze this in really quick. Then we're going to bring on Jake Fromm on the show. So you're probably aware that Pete Goulding has moved on, become defensive coordinator at Ole Miss after having been at Alabama. The rumor that's out there on this is this is a kind of a push out on the part of Nick Saban. There's been some people that have disputed that. Cole Kubelik has disputed that. But the larger prevailing thought here seems to be that Nick Saban wants new coordinators. Certainly in the case of Pete Goulding, potentially maybe in the case of Bill O'Brien. I think it remains to be seen how that all evolves for Tuscaloosa. We're going to be watching that. But I did want to mention, much the same way we had the Todd Monken rumor near the top of the show today, there'd also been the rumor involving Glenn Schumann. Well, maybe Schumann goes back to Alabama. We even mentioned this on video the other night after Deion Bowie, committed to Georgia to the transfer portal, that rumor is kind of out there. Well, since then we've seen Schumann recruiting for Georgia. He may be back on the trail again here this week. up to this point in time, there really isn't a lot of evidence to suggest that maybe Schumann really is a candidate for Alabama defensive coordinator, that he's interested in that job at all. I'm not saying it's over and done with and not worth following, but the evidence we have thus far is that Schumann is still very much hard at work there at UGA. So we'll keep paying attention to that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And we'll also get ready here as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take to bring on former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. And boy, oh boy, the conversation that we're going to have with Jake is a lot different than the one that I had initially planned on happening. I was looking forward to this. We didn't get to talk to Jake last week. I was really looking forward to hearing from Jake about his excitement about the national championship. And obviously we'll do some of that. But in light of what's going on, you have to talk about the other sad and tragic news there as well. So as we bring on Jake Fromm here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take. Jake, I am so sorry that we have to talk under these circumstances, because I'm sure a story like this hits you harder than it hits even those of us who are deeply saddened by this. I'm sure it hits you even harder than that, because you've been a part of that Georgia program, and I guess you're still around, these folks here a lot. So I guess if you don't mind here, would you mind telling us, did you know Chandler personally? Did you know Devin personally? And, how does this news affect you here? And I'm sorry that that's our discussion today, but obviously it is what's on the mind of everybody right now. What can you tell us about your feelings about what you've been going through over the course of the last couple of days?
Yeah. Hey, Brandon. Man, it's absolutely terrible. Man, you go from the highest of highs, a national championship, to just the absolute lowest of lows. Just for the program, for the state of Georgia, for anyone who knows these two individuals, it is extremely, extremely just sad and just terrible to hear. I did know both of them personally, had run-ins with both of them. Both of them just extremely, just great human beings. Chandler always had a smile on her face, and Devin too, just a competitor and a hard worker, and just a great young man. So, man, terrible news. I know just everyone in that program and everyone who knows these two individuals are just hurting right now. And it's sad, man. It really is. I hate it. The only thing we can do is pray for comfort for the families, and that's it, man. Just anything we can, and just know that we're thinking of them, praying for them, and here to do whatever we need to do to help them get through this.
I think that's really well said, Jake. I really do. Would you mind, for our audience, they probably feel like they know Devin a little bit better just because he's a guy that we've seen on TV. For Chandler, we've learned a lot more about her recently. As somebody who played in the program, when you think about the role that the recruiting staff like this plays, what would her life have been like on a daily basis, and what was she doing for Georgia behind the scenes that maybe not everybody in our audience fully understands?
Yeah, just simply put, just recruiting her butt off. There is a whole lot more hours put into that job than meets the eye, than people think. And they are really an extension of Kirby and the coaching staff and what they do for recruiting. These are the individuals who are day in and day out with recruits, with players. They build very personal relationships with these players. Man, they do such a great job, and they're so underappreciated in what they do. And they really do an incredible job. And Georgia has an extremely great group of these recruiting staff that they have. They do a great job bringing great people in, and Chandler is definitely one of them. And she will very, very well be missed.
I think in the case of Devin, Jake, we don't get to see the inner workings of the team very much, but during like bowl week and national championship week, as you'll remember from your own career, the media is just around a little bit more. There are media days. There are interactions with sort of media and player that doesn't typically go on. And so I had seen, Devin with his teammates, especially those offensive lineman teammates, a lot over the last, couple of weeks. And I just am struck by how much they all just seem to be bonded. Kirby talks a lot about sort of the connectedness, the connection that the team has, and I don't think that's lip service. I do think that was a serious thing. And when you get invited to kind of be kind of a fly on the wall, at least for a little bit, the way we were the last couple of weeks, you just see them laughing and joking together. They spend a lot of time together. I know some of that's hard work, and I'm sure there are lots of days when none of those guys are obviously getting along because, the act of playing football just sometimes doesn't lend yourself to be in a very good mood, I'm sure. But, man, to see them smiling and laughing and having fun together, first of all, it just makes being a part of a team seem like the most fun thing in the world. And, B, I think it kind of brings out even more emotion right now because of just how full of life he always seemed to be when he was surrounded by his teammates and they were joking about whatever it was they might have been joking about in that particular moment.
Yeah, connection was their theme this year. And I definitely think the buy-in from the players and from the staff was definitely bought in to that idea, to that theme. And you know, your anecdote, like you said, just seeing the guys during bowl practice, during bowl week, just interacting and just competing with each other, obviously, but having a good time doing it. There's a level of respect that gets earned just throughout the course of the season, through spring practice, through the summer workouts, through camp, and then through the season. I promise there is not much about each other that these guys don't know, especially in college. You know, when you're living with one another, they get very, very closely acquainted. Man, you just build very, very deep relationships, and just to spend time with the guys. And I know Devin was well loved and well received on the team, and just full life and full joy. And man, it's just sad. It didn't even really feel real, to be honest.
I know, last thing for you on this particular topic, but because of the connection, because of what Kirby's kind of called those skull sessions where the players have gotten very used to being open and sharing with each other, I think the hope that a lot of us have is that might set up Georgia to be able to handle this a little bit. I'm not talking about winning football games. I'm not talking about getting back to the business of football. I'm talking about just dealing with the kind of like the immediate feelings that come out of all of this, that Georgia already seems to have some infrastructure in place to kind of handle some of this. Is that the sense that you get, because you're obviously much closer to this than we are, is that this team is already comfortable talking to each other, already comfortable to a certain extent sharing each other's feelings, and so therefore they may kind of already have a little bit of a pathway in place to be able to do some of this?
Yeah, 100%. There's a culture of competitiveness, of toughness, of discipline, and winning in that building. But don't get me wrong on this. There's also love and care in that building as well. And what they've done over the course of the season, being able to learn about each other, to get close like they have, is definitely going to help in this situation. And it's not something that you really prepare for, because no one saw this coming. And but I definitely think it will help them get through this in a much better way than otherwise.
I want to ask you one more before we let you go, and before we do that, I want to remind folks it's our Kroger A Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here right now, and of course this upcoming weekend, Kroger's got a great opportunity for you and your kids to be a part of Kroger Chef Junior. It's a guided kid cooking experience where you get a chance to watch your kids, prepare some food, be a part of that, learn more about that. This month they're making the dumpling sandwich, and just $7 per child. You get a chance to make the dumpling sandwich, but you also kind of come away with a apron and a patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card and box, and the dumpling maker. You can go to KrogerChefJunior.com and find out more about that. That's word junior spelled out JUNIOR. KrogerChefJunior.com for more on that. Jake, hard to transition away to something else, but we're obviously all, dying to hear your thoughts about what you thought about the national championship and how happy you were to see your program bring home a second straight national championship. How much fun was that for you to see the way in which Georgia played last Monday night?
Look, I think we all thought the Dogs would win, and they would win, in a very strong and admirable fashion. But I don't think anyone saw 65-7 coming. That was just an unbelievable performance. To something that that the semifinal game where they quote unquote maybe had gotten away with one, about time that actually happened to our program for once, and then to go out and show the rest of the world that, hey, we are the best team in the country, and to do it the way they did it, complete dominance on defense, complete dominance on offense. Stetson Bennett didn't even get touched, I believe, in the entire game. The dominating up front these young guys did, Bear and number 13 did on the edge.
Sure.
It was just incredible. The only thing that TCU did on offense was take advantage of a blown coverage and have like a 50, 60-yard throw and get a touchdown. That was it. Other than that, it was 100% all Georgia, and there was nothing they could do about it.
Boy, Jake, it's a fun thing to think about in the months to come. I know Georgia fans will look forward to reminiscing about that so much more. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts, and obviously I appreciate you also giving us some insight into what is a very tough time with this Georgia football program there as well. We're going to be praying for you too, Jake, because as you said before, you knew these folks personally, and that means a lot to us. So please pass on our feelings and our condolences to everybody there at UGA, and we will certainly look forward to talking hopefully very soon under much happier circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely, Brandon. Thank you.
Good stuff there from Jake Fromm. We love talking to him. We're grateful to have relationships like that, and thankful that Jake can help kind of share a little bit about what made Chandler and Devin such special people, and obviously a hard conversation for him, just given the fact that he knew them personally, and he's obviously still very close to a lot of people there out with the Georgia program, and it is not an easy time at all, and we want to be as respectful for that as we can possibly be as this team tries to deal with that. We'll close with this today. A lot of folks seemingly got some comfort from this. Last night, the NFL playoff game, Jake Camarda is obviously the Tampa Bay Bucks punter. And this got shared on social media a lot, and I think rightly so. Jake Camarda is obviously a great dude and very, very nice in the towel that he wore in his uniform last night. You see the number 77 for Devin Willock, the RIP for Devin and Chandler. A very, very nice sentiment by Jake Camarda. It's the kind of thing that's been shared with me a lot. Georgia fans were clearly moved by this. I certainly hope the families of both Devin and Chandler were too. I know the Georgia football program probably was there as well. So Jake Camarda is a guy that we really like. We've enjoyed cheering for him this year in the NFL, as he's had quite a number of exploits. And last night was obviously a very, very classy move on his part to do what he did. So, Jake, thanks for that, and thanks to all of you for being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again tomorrow. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down, where we will kind of move into your comments here, and we'll take a few, and then we'll get ready to wrap up after that. Probably won't go real long here today, but we did talk some football on the show, so if you want to be a part of talking some football with us here too, we can do that for a few minutes. And as we said off the top, different people kind of move at different paces, I guess, when it comes to stuff like this. And so this is simply a choice for how much of this you want. And right now, some of the fun stuff that we like to do doesn't quite feel so right. But kind of putting the news out there, giving a couple of thoughts on that, having, a little bit of a football conversation, just what we're trying to do here. So we'll do some of that via your comments there as well. Let me go over here and get some Facebook comments, and we'll kind of move through this here a little bit, a few minutes worth on the program here today. Let's see what else. Ryan Walker says Jake's always been a damn good dog, no doubt about that. And then he also shares some condolences for Devin and Chandler. Ryan, I appreciate you saying that. Tim Tatum on what Nebraska did. I tell you, I was really moved by that. And, yesterday on the show, John Stinchcomb talked about, sharing grief together, and the way in which a lot of these programs that, if you think about it, like Georgia and Nebraska almost feel like they have as little connection as any program could have. And yet what they did on their video board, the way they did it, was really, really touching and very, very moving. Tim, I thought that was indeed the case. I really did. Linda Carter Sapp also liked what she saw from Jake Camarda there as well. Barry Watkins, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. Let's see what else. Oren Chile on the subject of Jeremy Pruitt. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess Feinbaum has also kind of brought up Pruitt as a possible replacement for Goulding in Alabama. I do think that's going to be a big offseason storyline. And listen, eventually, y'all, I love doing this stuff. I love doing offseason storylines. I love doing, hot takes about, who's going to be where and who's going to be doing what. Like, I'm dying to kind of get back and do all that with y'all again. I really am. I'm so eager to do all that again. Just not quite in the mood for it right now. But who is Alabama's new defensive coordinator going to be? Do they move off of O'Brien as the offensive coordinator? Man, we're going to have some fun with that again at some point in time soon. We really are, because it's going to be a fascinating offseason. It truly is. It's going to be a fascinating offseason. Let's see what else is going on over here. Tennille Calvino, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Your kind words mean a lot to me. They really do. Joseph Kennedy says, I'm still mad that ESPN had Saban on talk pregame of the national title. Made me want to vomit. Yeah, I think the media got this really, really wrong. I really do. There was this thought that somehow in the aftermath of Georgia winning the national championship that Alabama was the story of, what does this mean? Georgia, are they the new Alabama? The idea that you would even use Alabama in the sentence to discuss Georgia in the aftermath of Georgia having the accomplishment that it had, what this shows you is, and look, there'll be a time to have this conversation more fully, but what this shows you is that every minute that Nick Saban has spent trying to manipulate the media has all been well spent. Nick Saban is a very willing source for ESPN writers. He's on TV anytime they want him to be. In the late stages of his career, Saban's actually become pretty media friendly, whereas maybe years ago you sort of thought him as being a media adversary. When it comes to the big national media, that's not been Saban's MO. Saban is very media friendly when it comes to the big national folks, and there's a reason why. You trade access for influence. That's just what you do. And so Nick Saban's granted access to, pretty much all national media works this way. News media works this way. Sports media works this way. At that sort of high national level, when the key newsmaker grants access, the key newsmaker typically gets favorable coverage. And so Saban has spent a lot of the last couple of years being on ESPN anytime ESPN wanted. And so, therefore, on a national championship day that's supposed to be about Georgia, well, ESPN made it about Nick Saban because that's what you do for one of your, key sources. And Nick Saban's become a pretty key source for ESPN. Let me pop over to YouTube here for a moment. We'll see how folks are doing over there. Jonathan Aaron says, I've heard that Monken's wife loves Athens. I have heard that firsthand. I shouldn't say firsthand. Everything I hear is like third or fourth hand. But I have heard that. I have heard that indeed. He says, happy wife, happy life. I would say that's true there as well. He also said, depending on, how much money you might be making and moving where you're moving, it could end up being a pay cut, given the fact that a couple of $1 million goes kind of a long way in Athens. I'd say that's probably true for the most part. B2B Visor also saying that Schumann has no loyalty to Saban. I'd say that's true. By the way, I did meet Thomas Tyson the other day. That's exactly right, Thomas. It was great to meet you. It really was. Very, very nice to be able to do that. Very nice. And as far as like Schumann's loyalty to Kirby being more so than Saban, I think that's probably true. I also think when it comes to, upward mobility, you probably need to think about yourself first on something like that, and I'm sure that Schumann probably would. But ultimately, there's a reason he chose to kind of follow Kirby years ago when he did. William Perry on the idea of the transfer portal. Yeah, that could be the case. That's never kind of a pleasant thing to consider, but that's probably true. Middle UGA Dogpan says doesn't seem like Monk has to do a whole lot of recruiting trips either. Very rarely see him on the trail like you see Schumann, Kirby. Yeah, there is kind of that template in place where sometimes your offensive coordinator is not your rabid dog recruiter. I would say Jim Chaney was like that at Georgia prior to, in years past. The one year that James Coley was offensive coordinator, probably part of the reason he got promoted to the job that he did was because he was sort of viewed as a high-value recruiter. when Mike Bobo was offensive coordinator, in addition to being OC, he was maybe at the time one of Georgia's most effective recruiters. Truly one of the most effective recruiters that Georgia had, even with guys who weren't offensive players oftentimes. He was just a great area recruiter down in South Georgia. So sometimes your OC is a big-time recruiter. Oftentimes it's not. In the case of Monken, you don't really see him in that role too much. And, Georgia's got the kind of recruiting staff built out other places where that's a possibility, and it seems to be working out pretty well for them. Greg Rosenberg says, I'm right about NIL. It's kind of a sucker's deal for the donors. They give money, but the university gets the financial benefit of winning, not them. They don't even get a tax break. And that is one of those things that I think you are going to have to figure out going forward. It's like there are people who would like to give to NIL, but anybody who gives money wants something for what he's giving. You just do. And I think the future of NIL has got to try to decide, well, what do you get for this? And how do you make giving a renewable resource? For instance, every player at Georgia that's on scholarship is on a scholarship named for someone. It's the so-and-so scholarship. Oftentimes when you hear about the J. Reed Parker, director of athletics, you've heard me say this before, it's that family that has endowed that position, which means that you put a bunch of money into a pot somewhere, into an investment account somewhere, and the rewards, the return on that investment is what pays the salary or pays the scholarship or whatever else. But you've invested so much money that it becomes kind of a renewable thing where the actual overall, endowment never goes down. Well, in NIL, you don't quite have that situation. If John Ruiz, the big Miami booster, if he gives out millions, that's millions he no longer has. And maybe he's trading that money for power and influence. Maybe he gets to say how those players get used at the Miami program. But most programs are not going to do that. They're just not. Most coaches are obviously willing to take the NIL money from the donors, but most coaches are not going to let that NIL donor become the boss. They're just not going to do that. At least if you're a good coach, you're probably not going to do that. So it does create a challenging scenario of, well, how do you make NIL giving worthwhile to the givers? Let's see what else. What else is going on over here? Nystrom Morgan asking about, don't we need Dominic Blaylock? He's been the linchpin for our wide receivers. I think one of the things that you see as a little bit of a challenge here is as Blaylock has worked his way to being healthy again, Georgia probably seems deeper at wide receiver than it's ever been at any point in time. And listen, Blaylock was a very important part of this team. Go back to his freshman year in 2019. Obviously George Pickens got a lot of the attention that year, rightly so, but Blaylock had a very good year and had some pretty big catches for Georgia. The Florida game comes to mind as a for instance on that. But, kind of moving forward, how much did Blaylock play this year? How much is he set to play next year, given the fact that two very experienced receivers are coming into the mix for Georgia? And listen, I'd love nothing more than for Dom to change his mind, come back to Georgia, because I think that he's a very good player. I do. Certainly think he has the potential to be an outstanding player. But I also believe that players want to play. And if Dom could go somewhere else and be a little bit more of a focal point of an offense in a way that he might not feel like he has a chance to be here, then you could understand why he might do that. Brandon Pratt said, is Florida still giving $13 million to a four-star quarterback? So he obviously laughs about that. That's the Jaden Rashada situation. The $13 million was reported by reputable outlets. Orlando Sentinel is, I think, the first to have the $13 million number. I still don't quite believe that was the extent of this. I don't. It still seems like an exaggerated claim to a certain extent. What people say off the record, they say on the record sometimes, very, very different things. But I think it speaks to a couple things here, that maybe Florida was so desperate to get Rashada, they made some huge promise to him. And much the same way the Colorado athletic director said the other day when they signed Deion Sanders the coaching contract, we don't have this money, but we're going to go out and raise it. Like, you make the promise to Rashada, but then you got to go out and raise the money. And at that huge level, you're just not capable of doing it. And, there's an old saying that if I owe you $13,000, I've got a problem. But if I owe you $13 million, then you've got a problem. And I think that's kind of ultimately what it comes down to for Rashada. It's like Florida's not giving him the money supposedly that he was promised, but Rashada's issue is nobody else is giving him that money either. That's just not the market value. That's a little bit more in line with what a NFL team would pay a rookie after that rookie's already proven himself through the entirety of a college career. But by comparison, Rashada hasn't done any of that. And, I just can't see in any universe in which Rashada, given what we know about him as a player, is worth that kind of money. And apparently nobody else thinks either, because no matter what he was originally promised, there is just simply no source out there that's willing to pay him $13 million. That's just a fact. Thomas Dew asking about replacing Keely Ringo at cornerback. That's going to be one of the hot topics this upcoming spring for sure. Whether it's the emergence of a guy like, say, Dalen Everett or whatever, that is going to be a hot topic. And by the way, the other problem that Florida's going to have in the Rashada situation is, and this is ultimately why a lot of this probably just sort of goes away, is the fact, and I saw where Kamani McLean went to Colorado, but we haven't gotten any kind of announcement on Rashada yet, one way or another, right? Am I missing this? Did I miss something out of the news on this? The other thing for Florida is, and this is not me being a Gator hater or poking at him, this is just the truth, is like, remember, it's still not legal in Florida, I don't believe. They want to change the law, but I don't believe they have. It's still not legal to use NIL as an inducement to recruits. And so Florida might not be able to make too big of a deal about anything on this, because maybe they can't be quite so sure they didn't break the law in all of this. So you got to be careful with that too. Christy asking about one of the things that came up on social media, which is whatever funds might be set up in honor of Chandler and Devin. I guess I'm still in the process of trying to learn more about that, but Christy, I'm not going to give up on that. We'll see what we can do on that. Mike 3883 says, why would that be illegal? Different states took different approaches to all this, and at one point, there was a hope that there might be kind of some sort of blanket, rule or some sort of national kind of legislation. That never quite happened. So different states took different tacks. Some, like say California, make it legal to pay high school players, make it legal to use, basically as an inducement to sign with the school or anything like that. Others have it set up where that's not the case. I think Florida's in the midst of maybe trying to change their law. It's one of those things where, like, Florida wanted to get out early and have one of the first NIL laws, and yet in doing so probably wrote a law accidentally that kind of put them in a competitive disadvantage compared to some other states. That actually what ended up being true is the states that had no NIL law whatsoever may have been in a little bit better position. And I think in all likelihood, what people are doing behind the scenes, listen, there are lots of laws in a given time that are not enforced, sort of depending on whichever political party is in power. Some laws seem to get enforced, some laws don't seem to get enforced. So it would certainly not be a new thing for a law to be on the books and not really be enforced. So my guess is in most states, NIL kind of functions pretty much the same as it does other places, but you just sort of have to keep it somewhat quiet because of how the law is written, whether it's enforced or not. That's likely the reality. But the one thing you're not going to hear in light of the fact that NIL laws are written the way they are is you are not going to hear too many people openly, brazenly bragging about, kind of thwarting them, I guess. Let's see what else. Greg Rosenberg says we're thin at corner, just Laster, Everett, and Green, maybe Humphrey, but haven't really heard much about his development. Weird position to be in a year after best defensive class ever. Maybe that's the case, but these things have a way of kind of taking care of themselves. If Everett were to really step up for you, then you probably feel better about that. And, I think it's also probably appropriate to kind of understand what a normal level of depth is. And, it may seem like Georgia has some unproven situations there at cornerback, but I can promise you, as you already know, is that most programs in the country would be quite envious of whatever Georgia's project seems to be. Let me go to DawgNation.com here for a moment. Mario Smith says Smoke Bowie will also help out, and I believe that's the case. I guess I've kind of learned a little bit more about Bowie, too, for whatever reason, I was under the impression that maybe he might not be a quite true traditional cornerback. But in kind of learning more about him, I think maybe he actually kind of can be. Brandon Pratt says, could Bowie move to corner? I mean, I sort of get the impression that Bowie might be able to do a lot of things. For whatever reason, I'm not an X's and O's expert. I don't pretend to be. I sort of had Bowie kind of pegged as a nickelback, sort of. But maybe he could play a multitude of things for Georgia. Greg Rosenberg, also on the subject of Jaheim Singletary. I think the issue with Singletary is, for me, it kind of comes down to you just never really heard much about him this year. It just doesn't seem like he made much of an impact. And that's not me trashing the young man on the way out the door. I honestly don't know. He may go on to be, Deion Sanders somewhere else. I don't know. But for his year here at Georgia, we just didn't hear much about him. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says that going back to the Saban-Pollock moment in the national championship, he says that Saban didn't look mad. He looked defeated. You may be right about that, Matt. Big Dog says it looks like we might need to lose about 8 or so more players. Any thoughts on who else might leave? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I want to kind of put out into the universe what I think might happen, but I would, certainly over the course of the, think about post-spring, transfer window, things like that. It is certainly true that Georgia might not be completely done as of yet. I would agree with that. Elijah Pitts on the subject of the story that Jeff wrote with Devon's high school coach. It was a very tough read because, as Elijah pointed out, not only does it give you great insight into what Devon was like, coming through high school, finding his place here on this Georgia roster, but also the fact that he had so much enthusiasm for how good Georgia was going to be next year. It's really sad to think about that. Lee B., thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. The idea, as you say, for connecting all of us during, tough times, I take that really, really seriously. As I said a little earlier, hopefully I don't take myself seriously. I mean, I really don't want to do that. But I do think this is an important job from time to time. And, look, Georgia football means a lot to a lot of people. And so when something really big happens, and a lot of times that's something really good, you kind of want an outlet to be able to express that. And when something, really, really the opposite of that takes place, like we're going through right now, once again, some sort of outlet platform to process all of that probably makes sense there too. One of the things I sort of think in my mind sometimes is that ultimately the job of talking football for a living may not feel like that important of a job, but very important people such as yourself who are doing a lot of hard work and contributing to society and doing all these kinds of things, this show becomes a tool for you to use in a situation like that. And so that's what makes my job important, the fact that important people use this as a tool to either, help them get through a long work day or a tricky family situation they might be going through. But that's really what I sort of think of this show as sort of a tool for other people to use. And sometimes that's watching or listening live. Sometimes that's, stacking up a bunch of episodes and just sort of letting them play on a long trip or something like that. Whatever the way in which people use the show, I'm just thankful that the content we create can be used as a tool to help people get through whatever they might be needing to go through. And sometimes it's a situation like this where we're sort of all going through the same thing. But I do take it very seriously, the idea of being here for people in a situation like that. Yard Dog on the subject of retiring Devon's jersey. I don't think there's any doubt that something will be done. And, this is kind of a weird thing to think about. But I guess, in the future, Georgia's going to be a program where there's always some sort of reminder of this. And this is a part of our history now. So when we go to Sanford Stadium, we'll see some sort of remembrance of this. We'll think back on this in some form. Whether somebody online also suggested maybe instead of retiring the number, maybe 77 should become the kind of thing that's an honor to wear. And I kind of like the idea of that. I don't know how much momentum could ever grow for something like that. And there may be, a good reason not to do that I'm not thinking of. I'm not sure. But I do kind of like the idea of that. That would become the kind of thing that, signifies what Devon seemed to symbolize. And, as we did that, Chandler's memory would hopefully be honored and all that too. So I'd be in favor of something like that. Ron Scroggy, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Thank you. Senior Dog 54 also says that Bowie was an amazing. Let me get Senior Dog on this. He says Bowie's an amazing athlete in high school, and talking about maybe some difficulty. I do truly believe that there's a broken culture at Texas A&M. I don't think there's any disputing that whatsoever. And y'all can make fun of me on that if you want to, because obviously I touted Jimbo as a likely winner there in College Station, and it does not seem like for now that's going to work out. Now maybe some of that changes here this upcoming season, but obviously it's been pretty embarrassing there thus far, and I think the culture has eroded because of that. So for any young person, whatever they were somewhere else, I think they have a chance to be something different at a place like Georgia, because all they have to do is just look around and see what other people are doing and just mimic that. That's all they have to do. And so I just think it's easier to both fit into Georgia's culture and eventually be a contributor to Georgia's culture, because the pathway for that is so well marked, and the modeling and the demonstration of how to do that is so easily observed. So hopefully that ends up being the case. All right, we're going to go for right now. Thanks to all of you for being here. And, I promise we're going to have fun. I promise we're going to do all of that. We have got a lot of fun things that are going to happen in the months to come. Trust me when I tell you, we're going to get there. I promise. But I appreciate you allowing us to kind of take a step in that direction today by talking some football and sort of giving that to people who wanted that. And I appreciate you also kind of staying with us in kind of that sort of mournful spirit as we look at what's been lost from this Georgia community there too, and hearing from a guy like Jake Fromm today who knew them personally, and I thought was very poignant in all of that. So as I told you yesterday, we're going to try to do both, and we're going to try our best to get it right. So thanks for all of that. Thanks as well to our friends at R.S. Andrews. You can find them online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. Water heater goes out. In many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. So find them online at rsandrews.com. And then we'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia.